A man worth $10 billion sat alone in one of the most opulent restaurants in Chicago, yet he looked as though he had stepped out of a thrift store. His faded jacket was frayed at the elbows, his shirt soft and threadbare, his work boots scuffed and weary from years of imagined use. On the surface, he appeared no different than a man who might have been struggling to pay rent, a stranger who seemed almost misplaced in the carefully curated world of fine dining. But beneath the unshaven disguise and cheap spectacles sat Damian Cross, a man whose influence stretched across continents. His fortune was more than wealth. It was a suit of invisible armor stitched from global holdings, real estate empires, luxury brands, and medical innovations. His name alone could bend markets. His signature could redirect entire industries. Yet tonight, none of that mattered. He wasn't here for the food. He wasn't here to indulge in decadence that he himself owned. He was here searching for something that money could not purchase: honesty. The irony was bitter. In a life surrounded by people who flattered, smiled, and nodded on command, he longed for the kind of unfiltered truth that had once been common when he was young. Every laugh at his jokes now was calculated. Every handshake was transactional. Every word was weighed before being spoken. He had built an empire that sparkled on the outside. Yet in his quieter moments, Damian wondered if beneath all the polish there was nothing but emptiness. So he disguised himself, stripping away the intimidating aura of the billionaire and stepping into the worn identity of an ordinary man. He became invisible, just another face among many. This ritual was not new. Every few months, when the weight of his own power felt unbearable, Damian would descend into anonymity. He would slip into cheap clothes, unshaven, with glasses that distorted his eyes, and walk into one of his own establishments to see how the world treated a man who seemingly had nothing. Tonight, his destination was the Gilded Steer, the crown jewel of his hospitality division. A steakhouse whose name alone whispered prestige, known for its $500 cuts of beef and a wine cellar worth millions. It attracted politicians, celebrities, and tycoons from around the globe. It was a theater of wealth, where status was measured by what one ordered and who one was seen with. Damian had never dined here in person, though his executives assured him of flawless reports and soaring profits. Numbers, however, told only part of a story. They revealed efficiency, revenue, and yield, but they never revealed the soul of a place. As Damian entered through the towering brass doors, the cold night air vanished, replaced by warmth and the hushed ambience of wealth. The scent of seared beef, rich leather, and expensive perfume coiled in the air. The restaurant glowed in dim amber light, chandeliers dripping crystals over polished mahogany tables. It was elegance distilled, designed to impress and intimidate. The hostess, a tall woman with perfect hair and an even more perfect smile, looked him up and down. Her eyes flickered with disdain before her lips curved into a brittle greeting. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her tone already suggesting she expected him to leave. Damian's voice was rougher, pitched to sound weary, smaller. "No reservation, just a table for one." Her smile strained further. "We are fully booked tonight," she said, though her glance at the seating chart revealed otherwise. After a pause, she added, "I can offer you a small table, near the kitchen entrance. A deliberate dismissal, the worst seat in the house. A seat meant for those who didn't belong." "That will do," Damian replied evenly. He followed her through the room. Conversations paused. Forks lingered midair as patrons glanced at him, noting the ill-fitted jacket, the ordinary glasses. He felt their judgments prickle against his skin. This was the kingdom he had built, a place where a man was measured not by his soul, but by the price tag stitched into his collar. The hostess deposited him at a wobbly little table tucked against the swinging doors of the kitchen. Noise and commotion slipped through the gap every time the doors opened. A crash of pans, muffled voices, the roar of flames. The table was an afterthought, a place where one was meant to be forgotten. Perfect. From this vantage point, Damian could watch everything. Waiters glided between tables with the polished grace of predators, their smiles widening or narrowing depending on the perceived worth of the diner. He saw the manager, Victor Harlan, a slick man in a suit cut just a little too tight. Harlan laughed loudly at a table of city officials, his grin sharp and insincere. But the moment he turned, his face hardened, barking orders at staff with quiet cruelty. Damien leaned back in his chair. The machine was running smoothly. Profitable, efficient, but soulless. A sigh escaped him. Was this all his empire had created? Gloss without depth? Performance without humanity? He had been nursing a glass of water for several minutes when a waitress approached his table. And at once, Damien noticed she was different. The others gleamed with forced charm, but this young woman carried a quiet weariness that made her real. Her brown eyes were wide and intelligent, but tired, shadowed with sleeplessness. Her chestnut hair was pulled into a severe ponytail, and though her uniform was neat, the apron was worn thin at the edges. A faint tremor lived in her hand as she set down a basket of bread. "Good evening, sir," she said softly. "My name is Elena Marlowe. I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with a drink?" Damien looked at her name tag, then at her face. Elena, a simple classic name. Somehow it suited her. "I'll have the cheapest beer on the menu," he said deliberately, watching her carefully. No flicker of disappointment, no look of disdain crossed her features. She only nodded politely. "Of course, sir. I'll bring that right out." She walked away with steady grace, and Damien's eyes dropped to her shoes. Black, slip-resistant, cracked at the seams, the soles worn thin. Shoes that had carried her through countless shifts. Shoes of someone who did not have the luxury of replacing them. A small detail, but a telling one. And for the first time that evening, Damien felt something stir inside him. Curiosity. Who was Elena Marlowe, the waitress who looked at him and saw not a poor man, not a nuisance, but simply a person? He didn't know it yet. But her worn shoes and tired eyes were about to set in motion events that would shake his empire to its very core. Elena Marlowe moved through the gilded steer like a ghost in a theater, where every role was scripted. She smiled when required, laughed lightly when expected, and bowed her head when a guest demanded deference. But behind the polished performance, her thoughts raced with worries that never left her, not even in her briefest moments of rest. To her co-workers, she was competent, professional, perhaps a little too quiet. But silence was her shield, one she had learned to hold tightly because speaking too freely in this place could be dangerous. At 23, Elena should have been building her future. Once, she had dreamed of becoming a certified accountant, her love for numbers and balance sheets guiding her through college. She had seen herself working in an office downtown, wearing sharp suits, steady paycheck in hand, perhaps even enjoying the luxury of weekends free. But life had dealt her a crueler hand. Her younger brother Noah, only 17, was the center of her world. He should have been worrying about prom dates and scholarships, but instead, his days were a carousel of doctor visits, hospital stays, and fragile hope. He had been born with a rare genetic condition that scarred his lungs. Every breath he took was harder than the last. Every winter brought with it the fear of an infection that could spiral into catastrophe. The treatments were experimental, the medication staggeringly expensive. Insurance had long ago reached its cap. The Marlowe savings, what little had ever existed, had been swallowed whole. Their mother had died 3 years earlier, a sudden stroke that left Elena not only grief-stricken, but thrust into the role of Noah's guardian. Their father was a ghost, vanished long before either of them could remember. So Elena carried it all. Every bill, every sleepless night, every impossible decision between groceries and prescriptions. The job at the Gilded Steer was supposed to be her lifeline. It paid more than the diner down the block, more than retail, more than tutoring. But the cost was steep. Not just the grueling hours or the sore feet, but the price exacted by the man who ruled over the staff like a predator circling wounded prey. Victor Harlan, the manager of the Gilded Steer, wore power like cheap cologne, loud, suffocating, impossible to ignore. His charm with the wealthy patrons was all surface, a glimmering mask. But with his staff, his true nature bled through, sharp, cruel, opportunistic. He had a talent for finding weakness, for sniffing out desperation, and he wielded it like a blade. For Elena, the knife had first cut months ago. Exhausted after a double shift, she had made a small mistake, logging a shipment incorrectly. A minor error, one she could have fixed with a few keystrokes. But Harlan had seized upon it, twisting it into something sinister. He had accused her of theft, told her she had cost the restaurant thousands, inflated the number until it became a fabricated debt of $5,000. Then he had cornered her in his office, his voice low and oily, his words pressing into her like a trap snapping shut. If she didn't cooperate, he would report her, blacklist her, destroy her career before it even began. No one in the industry would hire a thief. Cooperate. That was the word he had used. But what he meant was submit. From that moment on, Elena's life was no longer her own. He deducted money from her paycheck, skimmed her tips, and forced her to help him with the books. Her unfinished college education, 2 years of accounting courses before Noah's health had forced her to drop out, became a curse. He used her knowledge to clean his fabricated invoices, to reconcile numbers that didn't belong, to cover tracks she didn't fully understand. And what she saw terrified her. Invoices from suppliers that didn't exist. Payments to companies she had never heard of. Numbers so large they made her stomach twist. It wasn't just theft. It wasn't just greed. Something far darker was being hidden in the ledgers of the Gilded Steer. But Victor Harlan had made certain she could never speak of it. He reminded her again and again that if she slipped, if she even thought about telling someone, Noah would pay the price. That was Victor's power. He didn't need to threaten Elena directly. He only had to whisper about her brother, about his fragile lungs and the staggering medical bills. He knew where her softest wound lay, and he pressed on it relentlessly. So Elena wore her mask. She smiled for customers, endured Victor's sneers, and lived each day on the edge of despair. When she saw the man in the faded corduroy jacket seated at table 32, her heart ached with sympathy. It was the worst seat in the house, the one reserved for people Victor deemed unworthy of the main floor. She had watched the hostess lead him there with the faintest smirk, and she knew how the other servers would treat him, with neglect at best, disdain at worst. But Elena wasn't built like that. Her mother had raised her with a simple rule. A person's worth isn't in their wallet, it's in their character. So she approached him the same way she would approach a man in a $1,000 suit. When he ordered the cheapest beer, she didn't flinch. She only nodded and smiled with quiet respect. Yet there was something about him that unsettled her, not in a threatening way, but in a way that made her wonder. He wasn't like the other down-and-out guests she'd seen. There was a stillness to him, a watchfulness, a presence that felt oddly out of place. He didn't fidget, didn't bury his face in his phone, didn't scan the room for approval. He simply sat quiet and observant, like a man taking the measure of the world around him. When she returned to take his order, she steeled herself, prepared for the awkwardness of guiding him towards something affordable. Instead, his eyes met hers over the menu, and his voice came low and steady. "I'll have the Emperor's Cut." The words nearly made her lose her composure. The Emperor's Cut was the restaurant's crown jewel, a 48-ounce porterhouse, dry-aged for 90 days, served with truffle reduction and foie gras. It was indulgence carved into steak form, a meal ordered for spectacle, for Instagram, for corporate accounts. It was $500. She glanced instinctively at his scuffed boots, then back at his calm face. Her stomach tightened. Was he joking, delusional, or worse? Was he setting her up for humiliation? Victor would skin her alive if this man couldn't pay. She had a choice. She could question him, embarrass him, steer him toward something smaller, or she could trust him. She looked into his eyes again. There was no bravado there, no wild gleam, just a quiet, almost challenging certainty. And in that moment, Elena made a decision. She would treat him with dignity. "An excellent choice, sir," she said, her smile gentle. "How would you like that prepared medium rare?" he replied evenly. Then, after a pause, and a glass of the Cheval Blanc, 1998. Her heart nearly stopped. The Cheval Blanc, one of the most coveted wines in the cellar. Even by the glass, it cost $300. Combined with the steak, his bill would be more than her rent. Her training screamed to alert the manager to demand a card up front. But something deeper, a spark of intuition, a strange kinship, told her to trust him. "Right away, sir," she said quietly. hiding the storm inside her chest. But she knew Victor Harlan would not let this pass unnoticed. Elena keyed the order into the system, her hands trembling ever so slightly. The screen blinked red, flagging the high-value request with a warning. Orders that crossed a certain threshold triggered an alert on the manager's terminal, an automatic safeguard against mistakes or fraud. She didn't need to turn her head to know what was coming. Victor Harlan was already moving across the floor, his polished shoes tapping against the tiles like the measured beats of a predator closing in. He cut through to the dining room with oily confidence, his eyes narrowed, his smile gone. "Vance," he hissed when he intercepted her near the wine station, his body blocking her from view. His voice was low, sharp, each syllable dipped in venom. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Elena forced her face into the mask she wore so well, professional, calm, meek submission. Inside, her pulse was racing. Table 32 ordered the Emperor's cut and a glass of the Cheval Blanc. "Sir," she said carefully, "I just put the order in." Victor's face darkened, his mouth twitching as if he couldn't quite believe the audacity of her words. "Are you insane? Did you look at the man? He looks like he crawled out of a soup kitchen." His voice rose, though he kept it low enough not to attract patrons' attention. "And you didn't get a card from him first?" "He didn't strike me as the type to joke about it," Elena said softly, her voice steady though her insides twisted with fear. "I didn't want to insult a guest." "Insult?" Victor scoffed, his lip curling. "He's insulting us just by being here. When he walks out that door without paying, that steak and that glass of wine are coming straight out of your paycheck. Every last cent, you understand me?" He leaned closer, so close she could smell the bitterness of coffee on his breath, the faint musk of expensive cologne trying, and failing, to cover the rot underneath. "You're already on thin ice with me," he whispered. "Don't make me push you off." Cold terror sank into her bones. She could see it already. Her wages drained, her tips seized, her fabricated debt doubled. Victor would strangle her with it until she couldn't breathe. And if she lost this job, Noah's treatments would vanish. Her entire body quaked on the edge of collapse. But then, something happened. Over Victor's shoulder, she saw the man at table 32. The one in the corduroy jacket. He was watching. He couldn't hear the words, but he could see the exchange. The manager's posture, the sharpness in his voice, Elena's subdued stance. And then, with a calmness that seemed almost surreal, the man nodded. Just once. A slow, deliberate gesture. It was nothing, a tiny motion. And yet, it was everything. Because in that instant, Elena realized he knew. He saw her fear, he saw Victor's cruelty. And for the first time in months, she felt the smallest flicker of courage stir inside her. She wasn't invisible. "I understand, Mr. Harlan," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I will take full responsibility." Victor stared at her for a moment longer, suspicion narrowing his eyes. Then, with a disgusted sound in his throat, he stalked away, muttering under his breath about incompetence. Elena drew in a slow, shaky breath and turned back to her task. She walked into the wine cellar, where the silence was thick and reverent. Bottles lined the walls like soldiers, each one a fortune sealed in glass. Her hands no longer trembled. She reached for the Cheval Blanc, handling it as though it were a sacred relic, carefully uncorking and pouring with perfect precision. When she returned to table 32, the glass glowed crimson under the chandelier light. "Your Cheval Blanc, sir," she said smoothly, setting it before him. The man took the glass, swirling it gently, but instead of tasting, his eyes lifted to her. "Is everything all right, Elena?" he asked softly. His voice was quiet but cutting, as though it pierced through the surrounding hum of the restaurant. Your manager seemed agitated. Her heart skipped. He had noticed everything. "Yes, sir," she lied, her mask snapping back into place. "He's just very passionate about maintaining our standards." The man studied her for a moment, then took a slow sip of the wine. His eyes closed briefly, savoring it before opening again, this time locking firmly onto hers. "I have a feeling," he said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial tone, "that your standards are much higher than his." Elena's breath caught. For a moment, she forgot the weight of debt, the fear of Victor, the crushing burden of her brother's illness. Because in that sentence, this stranger had seen her, truly seen her. in a way no one had in years. Throughout the meal, an unspoken understanding flowed between them. He asked her about the city, not about tourist attractions, but about neighborhoods, hidden corners, the people who lived in them. He listened when she answered, genuinely listened, not out of politeness but curiosity. His eyes didn't wander, his tone never dismissed, and Elena in turn felt something unfamiliar. She felt like a person again. Not a waitress, not a debt, not a victim, a person. But as she moved between tables, balancing plates and smiles, her mind began to spin. This man was different. He carried himself with a quiet, unsettling authority beneath his disguise. She couldn't explain why, but she felt it deep in her bones. He was powerful. And a dangerous idea began to take shape. Maybe, just maybe, he was the lifeline she and Noah so desperately needed. He was reckless, insane. If she misstepped, Victor would destroy her. But when she glanced across the room and saw Victor laughing with wealthy patrons, his false charm oozing while his corruption rotted the foundations beneath him, she knew she had no choice. She had to try. The risk was terrifying. But Elena Marlowe was going to pass the stranger a message. The dinner service pressed on, a relentless tide of plates, orders, and small talk. To any observer, Elena Marlowe looked like every other waitress, balancing trays, pouring wine, offering polite smiles. But inside, her thoughts were a whirlwind, every step carrying the weight of a decision that could change her life forever. The man at table 32, quiet, watchful, oddly commanding, was finishing his coffee. Time was slipping through her fingers. If she was going to act, it had to be now. But how? She couldn't whisper to him. Victor's hawk-like eyes roved the floor, missing nothing. She couldn't linger too long at the table. That alone would draw suspicion. Even a single word in passing could be overheard, twisted, used against her. No, if she was going to reach him, it would have to be in silence. A note. Her heart pounded at the thought. Just 4 or 5 words, folded into anonymity, slipped onto his table like a secret smuggled past a guard. But what words? Help me. Too desperate, too personal. It would sound like the cry of a cornered employee rather than the truth she needed him to see. My boss is corrupt? Too simple, too easy to dismiss as bitterness. No, she needed something sharper, something that would cut through the noise, hook his mind, make him curious enough to act. It had to feel bigger than her. Bigger than one waitress's plight. Her thoughts flashed to the ledgers Victor had forced her to reconcile. The fake suppliers, the inflated invoices, the names that didn't exist in any registry, the shipments routed through shadowy channels. She didn't know the full story, but she knew enough. Something was deeply, dangerously wrong, and the world needed to know. She slipped into the cramped employee break room, her pulse drumming so loudly she swore someone outside would hear it. The room reeked of stale coffee and burned popcorn, the walls plastered with half-faded motivational posters no one believed. Her hands shook as she grabbed a clean linen napkin from the service stack. She pulled a pen from her apron pocket, its plastic barrel slick with sweat. For a moment she froze. This was madness. If Victor caught her, if anyone caught her, it wouldn't just be her job, it would be Noah's lifeline. His medication, his future, everything. But then she thought of her brother lying in his narrow bed, the faint whistle of his breathing, the way he tried to smile when she came home late, pretending he wasn't scared. She thought of Victor's voice, low and venomous, reminding her that every penny she earned could be stripped from her. She thought of the stranger at table 32, nodding at her as if to say, "I see you," and her courage crystallized. She pressed the pen to the napkin, her handwriting tight and hurried. "They're watching you." It was vague but powerful. It would make him question everything. Who were they? Why him? The kitchen is not safe. Cryptic, menacing. It could mean food safety or something far worse. Check the ledger in Harlan's office. Specific enough to give direction, but not enough to incriminate her outright. He's poisoning the supply chain. The words made her stomach twist, but they carried weight. They suggested corruption on a scale far beyond one man. A phrase like that would compel action. She sat back, her breath shaking. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Quickly, she folded the napkin into a small, tight square and tucked it deep into her apron pocket. Against her thigh it burned like a live coal. Her shift was nearly over. The man had already paid. Exact change, down to the penny, $867.53. No tip. Not an insult, she realized, but a signal. He wasn't here for the performance. He dealt in specifics. He was waiting. Elena returned to his table for the final clearing, her pulse thundering in her ears. The dining room blurred into shadows and sound. Victor was across the room, laughing too loudly at some patron's joke, but she knew he could turn his gaze on her at any second. She forced her voice steady. "Will there be anything else for you this evening, sir?" The man looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "No, thank you, Elena." The meal was exceptional. His words were polite. His eyes said something else. "I'm listening." Her hands moved automatically, clearing dishes, stacking cutlery. Then, with a sleight of hand born from desperation, she slipped the folded napkin from her pocket, sliding it beneath the small black bill tray. The motion was so smooth, she almost couldn't believe she'd done it. The tray left her hand. The note was on the table. But then, his voice cut through the air. "Wait." The single word stopped her heart. She froze, her back stiff, panic flooding her veins. Had he seen? Did he know? Or worse, had she been too clever, too discreet? Slowly she turned. His eyes weren't on her. They were on the tray, on the empty space where the napkin should have remained. He had seen her hide it, then pick it back up as if she'd taken it away. Confusion flickered in his gaze. Disappointment. Her stomach dropped like a stone. She had failed. For one terrible second, she thought of crumpling the napkin, hiding it forever, pretending none of this had happened. But something stronger took hold of her. She returned to the table, her movements stiff, mechanical. Victor was shifting at the host stand, his conversation faltering, suspicion beginning to spark in his eyes. Elena tilted the tray just enough. The napkin slid free, landing silently on the polished wood. "You forgot your tip," she whispered. The words barely audible, flimsy and desperate, but all she could think of. And then she walked away, her entire body trembling, her throat tight with terror. She had done it. She had jumped from the cliff without a parachute. Now all she could do was pray. He caught her before she hit the ground. Damien Cross waited until Elena vanished through the swinging doors of the kitchen before moving. The hum of the restaurant washed around him, glasses clinking, conversations blending into a low symphony of indulgence. But at his small table by the kitchen, the world narrowed to one thing: the folded square of linen hidden beneath the tray. He reached out casually, as though adjusting his jacket, and slid the tray closer. His fingers brushed the fabric, too soft to be paper, too deliberate to be accidental. With a smooth, unhurried gesture, he slipped it into the pocket of his jacket. Victor Harlan's eyes were on him from across the room. Damien felt the weight of the stare, sharp and suspicious. He didn't linger. He stood, shrugging on his worn jacket, and gave the manager a slight, meaningless nod, just enough to suggest deference from an ordinary man. Then he walked toward the exit. He didn't look back. The night air outside was damp and heavy, with the scent of rain and exhaust. Damien leaned against the brick wall of the adjoining building, his heart beating harder than it had in years. He wasn't Damien Cross the billionaire now. He was just a man on a dark street with a secret burning in his pocket. He unfolded the napkin beneath the glow of a street lamp. The ink was rushed, the letters uneven, but the words were sharp enough to cut through him. "They're watching you. The kitchen is not safe. Check the ledger in Harlan's office. He's poisoning the supply chain." Damien read it once, twice, 3 times. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't desperation scrawled in fear. It was a warning, a declaration of war, written by a hand that had everything to lose. His throat tightened. Poisoning the supply chain. The phrase hit him harder than he expected. His empire wasn't just money and glass towers. It was reputation, trust. Every Blackwood, or rather Cross, property bore his name as a seal of quality, of untouchable luxury. If even a whisper of contamination, let alone deliberate poisoning, seeped into that chain, the empire would collapse. It couldn't be real. It was too grotesque, too damaging. And yet, he believed it because of her eyes. He had seen fear before, calculated, manipulative fear. But Elena's eyes held a different kind, the kind born of desperation, of someone fighting a battle far larger than themselves. And still, she had risked everything to slip this note to a stranger. That wasn't the act of a liar. It was the act of someone drowning. Damien began to walk, letting the city swallow him. Neon bled across puddles in the street, sirens wailed in the distance. Pedestrians hurried past, none of them sparing a glance for the man who could buy and sell their world 100 times over. He welcomed the anonymity. He gave him space to think. They're watching you. Who? Harlan or someone else entirely? The kitchen is not safe. Was it food safety violations or something darker, something criminal? Poisoning the supply chain. The words were too specific, too technical, to be the invention of a disgruntled employee. He found a dim bar tucked on a corner, a place with cracked leather booths and a jukebox humming in the background. It was nearly empty. Perfect. He slid into a booth at the back and ordered a whiskey neat. Then he pulled out his burner phone. A cheap device, untraceable, with only one number programmed. The line rang twice before a voice answered. Crisp, British, precise. Marcus Ellery. Damien exhaled slowly. Marcus was more than his chief operating officer. He was his anchor, the one man he trusted absolutely. It's me, Damien said. There was a pause. Your voice sounds tense. What happened? Damien told him everything. His disguise, the sneering hostess, the worst table in the house, Victor Harlan's oily charm, Elena Marlowe's quiet dignity and worn shoes, and finally the napkin. The words written in haste, the conspiracy it hinted at. On the other end of the line, Marcus was silent, processing. Poisoning the supply chain, he repeated at last. That's an extraordinarily specific accusation. It could be slander, Damien. A fabrication, a waitress with a grudge. No, Damien said sharply. This wasn't a grudge. I saw her fear. Harlan cornered her after she took my order. He was threatening her. She risked everything to slip me this. Instinct isn't evidence, Marcus warned. If you move on this too quickly, I'm not accusing. Damien cut him off. I'm investigating, quietly. Get me everything you can on Victor Harlan. Employment history, finances, social ties, and do it off the books. No audit trails, no corporate chatter. Use the private contractors. I want a full profile by morning. Marcus hesitated. And the ledger? She mentioned one in his office. That's the key, Damien said. His voice was low but steady, cold resolve in every syllable. If it exists, it's proof, and I need to see it tonight. There was a pause. Then Marcus sighed, heavy and resigned. Damien, you can't possibly mean I'm going in, Damien said flatly. You cannot break into your own restaurant. Marcus's voice sharpened. It's reckless. It's unnecessary. We could schedule a surprise audit. We could seize records legally. An audit gives him time to hide it, Damien countered. He already suspects me. If a team of auditors shows up tomorrow, he'll connect the dots. The only advantage I have is surprise. If I wait, the ledger is gone. You're insane, Marcus muttered, but there was no heat in it, just weary loyalty. All right, but not alone. I have a contact in Chicago. Security specialist, named Sloan Calder. Former M-Music's ghost entry and data retrieval are her specialty. She'll meet you. Damien nodded, though Marcus couldn't see him. Good. And Marcus, yes? Find everything you can on Elena Marlowe. I want to know who she is. If she's telling the truth, she's in danger. If she's lying, I need to know why. Consider it done. Marcus's tone softened. Be careful, this feels different. I know, Damien said, staring at the untouched whiskey in front of him. That's what worries me. The burner phone vibrated on the table 45 minutes later. Damien glanced down. One new message. Alley behind you. Black sedan. 2 minutes. He left cash for the untouched whiskey and slipped out the back of the bar into a narrow alley lined with dumpsters and cracked pavement. The city loomed above, neon bleeding across slick asphalt, but here in the alley the world felt silence suspended. The sedan arrived without a sound. Black, unmarked, its engine purred low like a predator crouched in the shadows. The back door opened. Damien slid inside. The driver didn't turn around. She watched him through the rearview mirror. Sharp features, cropped dark hair, eyes like cut glass, cold, precise, unflinching. Arthur said you needed a ghost, she said, her voice low and gravelly, each word clipped with efficiency. Ghosts don't come cheap. I can afford it, Damien replied evenly. Something flickered in her gaze. Amusement, maybe, or skepticism. So I hear. She shifted into gear. Name Sloan Calder. You went into a manager's office at the Gilded Steer. You think there's a ledger. What you don't know is whether it's paper or digital. Correct, Damien said. Amateur, she muttered under her breath, not unkindly, more like a doctor sighing at a patient who didn't understand their own illness. All right, here's the situation. The restaurant closes at midnight, staff out by 1, cleaning crew in at 4. That gives us 3 hours of breathing room. The building has state-of-the-art security. Ironically, your own system. Can you bypass it? Sloan glanced at him in the mirror. I could bypass the Pentagon with a paperclip and a stick of gum. But your problem isn't the main system. It's Harlan. Men that crooked are paranoid. His office will have its own locks. Maybe a keypad, maybe a motion sensor, probably both. And maybe, just maybe, something worse. Damien's pulse quickened. What's the plan? Sloan smirked faintly. Simple. We don't break in. We walk in. She reached into the passenger seat and dropped a duffel bag onto his lap. Inside was a janitor's jumpsuit, gray and unremarkable. The cleaning company's called Sparkle Clean Solutions. Arthur's already hacked their schedule, added 2 extra employees tonight. That's us. Once we're inside, I handle the locks. You play lookout, you see anything, you tap the comms once. Don't speak, don't improvise, don't be a hero, just tap. Understood. Damien pulled the uniform from the bag. It smelled faintly of detergent and rubber gloves, a far cry from the bespoke suits that usually clothed him. Understood, he said. By the time they reached a parking garage near the restaurant, Arthur had worked his quiet magic. Fake employee files now existed in Sparkle Clean system, complete with names, social security numbers, even payroll data. Enough to pass a surface-level check. Damien changed into the jumpsuit, the transformation jarring. In the mirror of the van's windshield, he no longer looked like a billionaire. He looked like a man who scrubbed grease off tile floors for minimum wage. The disguise was perfect. Sloan, already dressed in her own uniform, tossed him a plastic ID badge. Don't overthink it. Move like you belong. Janitors are invisible. That's our strength. They pulled up to the restaurant's service entrance. The opulence of the front was gone here. Instead, the back smelled of grease and bleach, lit by a single flickering bulb. The world of white linen and crystal chandeliers was only steps away, but it might as well have been another planet. Sloan knocked once. A supervisor opened the door, clipboard in hand, eyes glazed from fatigue. He barely glanced at their ID before waving them through. And just like that, Damien Cross was inside his own empire, unseen, unrecognized, reduced to anonymity. The kitchen was a different animal at night. Gone were the theatrics of sizzling pans and shouted orders. Now there was silence broken only by the low hum of refrigeration units. Shadows clung to corners, and the air smelled of lingering spices and cleaning solution. Damien pushed a mop bucket down the hall, feigning work. Sloan moved with practiced ease, her eyes flicking over vents, cameras, and sensors. Within minutes, she had looped the feed of the cheap security camera near Harlan's office, disabled the motion sensor, and knelt by the keypad. 2 minutes, she whispered into her comms. Damien stood in the hall, mop handle in hand, ears straining for any sound beyond their own. Every creak of the building felt amplified. His heart thudded in his chest, but his face remained impassive. He was used to negotiations worth billions, but this was different. This was primal. A trespass. There was a soft beep, then another. Cheap trophies, framed photos of him shaking hands with city officials, a garish leather chair. No physical ledger, Sloan muttered after a quick scan. But then her sharp eyes caught something behind a row of management books on a shelf. A safe. Found it. She ran her fingers over the keypad. Lips pursed. Can't crack this quickly or quietly, Damien's mind word. What's on the walls? Photos. Harlan with the mayor, Harlan at golf. Harlan coaching a little league team. Details Damien pressed. Dates, numbers. Sloan squinted at a small trophy. Little League Championship, 2023. His jersey number's 1. Try the date. In the number, she keyed it in. A pause. Then a soft, satisfying click. The safe opened. Inside was a passport, a thick stack of cash, and a single black leather-bound ledger. Sloan's hands moved with terrifying speed. She pulled out a tiny device, copying the hidden partition of Harlan's computer, while simultaneously photographing each page of the ledger with a pen camera. Damien stood guard at the door, every muscle taut, ears straining for the sound of footsteps. Minutes later, Sloane slid the ledger back into the safe, closed it, wiped down surfaces, and rearmed the lock. They slipped back into the hallway just as a cleaning crew member pushed a cart past. Damien bent over his mop, blending seamlessly. Sloane fell in beside him. To anyone watching, they were just two more invisible janitors. Only when they were safely back in the van, doors closed, did Damien exhale. The ledger lay in digital form now, uploaded to Marcus O'Leary's secure servers. As they drove away, Damien's phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. "We've decrypted the files. It's worse than you think. Call me." The van rattled softly over uneven pavement as Sloane drove them into the anonymity of Chicago's early morning street. The city was beginning to stir. Delivery trucks roaring, neon signs flickering off, the first commuters yawning into their phones. Inside the van, the silence was heavy, thick with anticipation. Damien Cross's burner phone buzzed. He answered immediately. "Talk to me," he said. On the other end, Marcus Ellery's voice was clipped unusually sharp. "We finished the initial review of Harlan's files. Damien, it's worse than we imagined." "Define worse," Damien replied, though dread already coiled in his gut. Marcus didn't waste time. "The invoices from Prime Organic Meats are fraudulent. The company doesn't exist, it's a front. The real supplier is Westland Meats, a processing plant that was shut down 6 months ago for bacterial contamination so severe the USDA ordered all products destroyed." Damien closed his eyes. He had read the reports on Westland. Rats in storage rooms, carcasses left unrefrigerated, meat swimming in pools of filth. It had been the sort of nightmare scandal that tanked companies overnight. And Harlan was buying from them? Yes. Buying condemned product for pennies, disguising it under fake supplier invoices, and funneling it through the Gilded Steer at premium prices. Patrons were eating toxic meat while paying $500 a plate. The profits were laundered into shell accounts, then kicked back to an organized crime syndicate operating out of the Midwest. Damien's grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles whitened. So the note wasn't exaggeration. He was literally poisoning the supply chain. Marcus's voice dropped lower. "That's not all. The ledger contained more than numbers. There were hidden video files. Insurance in case someone tried to expose him." Damien's chest tightened. "What kind of insurance?" Marcus hesitated, then answered. "Recordings from inside his office." He had a camera hidden. The footage shows him threatening Elena Marlowe. Damien sat forward, every nerve in his body alive. Threatening how? He confronted her about an inventory error she made weeks ago. A minor mistake. He inflated it into a fabricated debt, $5,000. Then he used her background in accounting to coerce her into reconciling his fake invoices. He made her complicit, or at least appear complicit, in laundering money through the restaurant. Damien's stomach turned. He pictured Elena's tired eyes, the tremor in her hand, the cracked leather of her shoes. She didn't have a choice, Marcus continued, his voice hard with anger. The footage shows him invoking her brother, Noah. He knew the boy's medical history. He knew their financial situation. He told her if she didn't play along, she'd lose her job, her income, and her brother would die without treatment. Damien, he's been holding her hostage with the weight of her brother's illness. For a long moment, Damien didn't speak. Rage burned through him, cold, controlled, lethal. He had faced corporate sharks, hostile takeovers, political adversaries who would bleed him dry for a fraction of what he owned. But this was different. This was personal. Elena Marlowe hadn't been a conspirator. She had been a prisoner. And yet, despite the danger, despite the iron chain Victor Harlan had locked around her throat, she had found the courage to write that note, to light the fuse that could burn his corruption to the ground. Damien's voice when he spoke was low and dangerous. "Then we move now. No more waiting." Marcus's tone was careful. "We have enough evidence to bring the FBI, the FDA, and federal prosecutors down on him like a hammer. But we also have a problem. Elena's face is all over those tapes. To anyone who doesn't know the truth, she'll look complicit. If Harlan's lawyers get to spin this, she could go down with him. Damien's jaw tightened. Not on my watch. Beside him, Sloane glanced over from the driver's seat, her eyes narrowing. If she's tangled in this, you need to be very sure she's worth protecting. I've seen good people dragged down with the bad. It's cleaner to cut loose. Damien met her gaze in the mirror, his expression like steel. She risked everything to warn me. She's the reason we have any of this. If I let her burn, then I deserve to lose everything I've built. Sloane studied him for a long second, then gave the faintest nod, her lips curling in the ghost of a smirk. Fair enough, then let's go hunting. The van turned sharply, heading toward Damien's penthouse. By the time they arrived, dawn was breaking across the city, washing the skyscrapers in pale gold. Damien stood at the window, watching his empire awaken below. He had entered the Gilded Steer last night seeking honesty. Instead, he had found rot, a disease running through the heart of his company. But now he also had something else. A reason to fight Elena Marlowe. Her courage had lit the spark. He would make sure the fire consumed Victor Harlan and anyone who stood with him. Behind him, Marcus Ellery's voice crackled over speakerphone. The FBI and FDA are ready to move on your command. Coordinated strike. Multiple warrants. If we go now, it will be decisive. Not yet, Damien said quietly. His eyes were fixed on the distant outline of the Gilded Steer. Harlan needs to see me first, face to face, and Elena needs to walk out of that building knowing she's not a victim anymore. Sloane folded her arms, leaning against the wall. You're planning a spectacle. I'm planning justice, Damien replied. The sun climbed higher, bathing the room in light. It was almost time. The Gilded Steer glittered with morning light as if nothing were wrong. Sunlight poured through its glass facade, glinting off polished brass, white linen, and crystal chandeliers. From the street it looked untouchable, still a temple of opulence, still humming with the illusion of power. But behind the glass the walls were rotting. Damien Cross stepped out of the black sedan in a suit cut sharp enough to wound. The janitor's uniform was gone, the disguise was gone. Today he was himself, every inch of him, the billionaire who had built an empire, the man whose name could move markets with a whisper. Sloane Calder walked a pace behind him, dressed in unremarkable black, her eyes sweeping the street for threats. Across the road, two vans idled quietly, nondescript but packed with FBI agents and federal officials waiting for the signal. Damien didn't hurry. He wanted every step, every second to stretch like a blade over Victor Harlan's throat. Inside, the restaurant staff froze when they saw him. The servers stuttered greetings, the hostess nearly dropped her pen, and even the kitchen noise faltered for a moment. They all knew the name Cross, but few had seen the man in person. Victor Harlan emerged from his office with a snake's smile plastered across his face. He spread his arms as if greeting an old friend. "Mr. Cross," he boomed, the false charm rolling off him like oil. What an unexpected honor. If I'd known, we would have rolled out the red carpet. Damien let the silence stretch, watching him squirm. Then he said, voice low but cutting, "The carpet's already red, Harlan. Stained with what you've done." The smile faltered, just slightly. Elena Marlowe, carrying a tray of coffee cups, froze in place. Her eyes widened, breath catching as realization dawned. She had given the napkin to the right man. Damien turned his head toward her. "Miss Marlowe, put that down. You won't be needing it." Her fingers trembled. She set the tray on the nearest table, her heart pounding so loudly she thought the entire restaurant could hear it. Victor chuckled, but the sound was thin now, strained. "I'm not sure what you've been told, but whatever it is, it's a misunderstanding. My staff sometimes." "Enough," Damien snapped. The word cracked through the dining room like a gunshot. Every employee froze, every eye turned. Damien stepped closer, his voice sharp and merciless. "You've been laundering money through this restaurant. You've been funneling poisoned meat through my supply chain. You've been blackmailing your employees into covering your tracks. And worst of all, you've been using a young woman's sick brother as leverage to enslave her." Gasps rippled through the staff. Someone dropped a spoon. Elena's knees threatened to buckle. Victor's mask shattered. His eyes turned cold, lips curling back in a snarl. "You can't prove any of that." Damien's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't reach for it. He didn't need to. The timing was perfect. "On the contrary," he said smoothly. "Every invoice, Every fraudulent payment, every recording from your office is already in the hands of federal agents. As of 5 minutes ago, your accounts are frozen, your shell companies seized, and your friends in Westland are under indictment. Victor paled. And now, Damien added, his voice soft with lethal satisfaction, so are you. As if on cue, the doors burst open. FBI agents stormed inside, badges flashing, weapons drawn but low. The dining room exploded into chaos. Shouts, gasps, staff scattering. Victor Harlan, the lead agent, barked, "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering, and endangerment of public health. Put your hands where I can see them." Victor lunged toward Elena, fury in his eyes, spittle on his lips. "This is your fault." But he never reached her. Damien moved first, a single step placing himself between them, his presence like an iron wall. Victor faltered, stumbling as agents grabbed him, wrenched his arms behind his back, and slammed cuffs onto his wrists. Elena stared, chest heaving, barely able to process what had happened. Victor roared as they dragged him out, his voice echoing through the dining room. "You think you've won, Cross? You think this little girl is innocent? She's in my ledger. She's part of it. You'll all burn together." The words cut her to the bone, her face flushed with shame, eyes darting to the staff who were already whispering, already judging. Damien turned, his gaze locking on her. Strong, steady, unshaken. "She's innocent," he said firmly, his voice carrying through the entire restaurant. Victor Harlan forged her chains, and she found the courage to break them. Without her, none of this would have come to light. The whispers died. The staff looked at Elena differently now, not with suspicion, but with awe. Tears blurred her vision. For months she had been invisible, crushed, silenced. And now, in front of everyone, someone had spoken the truth she had prayed the world would hear. The FBI escorted Harlan out into the daylight, his shouts fading into nothing. The dining room slowly returned to quiet, broken only by the hum of refrigerators and the trembling breaths of the staff. Damien stepped toward Elena. She looked up at him, her lips parting, her voice caught in her throat. "I don't," she stammered. "I don't know what happens now." Damien's expression softened just slightly. "What happens now is freedom, for you, for your brother. Harlan's gone, and I'll make sure you're not touched by the fallout." Her eyes widened, disbelief etched into her face. "You do that? For me? You did it first," Damien said simply. For a long moment, the world seemed to still. The opulence of the gilded steer faded. The noise of the city outside blurred. It was just the two of them, standing at the center of a storm that had finally broken. Elena Marlowe had risked everything to be heard. Damien Cross had listened, and together they had set fire to a kingdom of lies.